Monday afternoon in St. Anne's ethics hearing room, Ashley placed Mike's messages beside Omar's still image from the garage camera and faced the red live stream light. Her face was pale, but she did not fold. He told me the crash would get Nora where he could make her sign. My throat closed. Mike rose from his chair, his lawyer reached for his sleeve, and Ashley kept one hand on the papers as the room seemed to lose its air. Rain needled the windshield hard enough to make Old Mill Road look erased. I had both hands on the wheel of my van, my shoulders tight beneath my coat, watching the wipers drag gray water aside and lose the fight again. Sunday, November 22nd, 2026, had begun with Mike taking my keys to fill the tank, then putting them back on the kitchen counter. At 9:05, I had left the townhouse alone to open the print shop. 13 minutes later, the brake pedal went soft beneath my foot. I pressed it once. Nothing. I pressed again, harder, until the sole of my shoe slid against wet rubber. The van kept moving downhill. Stone wall ahead, bare branches on the right, a metal barrier on the left, black with rain. My mouth filled with the taste of pennies. I pulled the wheel, but the van skidded sideways, tires screaming over water, and struck the wall with a sound like a shelf collapsing inside my skull. The airbag burst against my face. Glass ticked across the floor mats. For a few seconds, I could not tell whether the rain was outside or running down my neck. My left wrist was pinned against the steering wheel, and the silver emergency medical bracelet cut coldly into my skin. Then the van's damaged car system clicked alive. My phone was ringing somewhere near the passenger seat. Mike's name flashed through a cracked screen. I tried to reach it. My fingers dragged over broken plastic, but the car system answered before I could. At 9:19, his voice filled the van, too clear against the rain. Dead or alive, get her to the hospital. Ashley's illness can't wait. I stopped breathing for one long second. Mike did not ask where I was. He did not say my name. He spoke as if someone else stood beside him, listening. My stomach tightened so sharply, I thought the crash had finally found its way inside me. Ashley was his younger sister. Ashley was sick, but Mike had known about my crash almost as soon as it happened, and he had made her illness the first thing that mattered. My hand shook against the wheel. I twisted my wrist free, pain flashing up my arm, and found the raised emergency button on the bracelet with my thumb. I pressed it. Once. Deliberately. The signal light blinked red through rain and blood. Outside, tires hissed on the road. A shape moved beyond the barrier, blurred by the windshield and weather. I could not make out a face. I closed my eyes after pressing the bracelet's emergency button, and I did not want to wake up. When I woke on Monday morning, the emergency ward at St. Anne's Hospital smelled of antiseptic, wet wool, and burned coffee. My ribs hurt when I breathed. My cheek felt swollen against the pillow. A monitor blinked beside me with calm green light, and the bracelet was still on my wrist, its silver surface streaked with dried blood. Mike Bell stood near the foot of the bed in his regional pharmaceutical sales jacket, looking arranged rather than worried. He was my husband. He was Ashley's older brother. Celia Grant, the charge nurse assigned to my bay, had admitted him because he was my documented husband. "Nora," Mike said, stepping closer, "you scared everyone." "Don't touch me," I said. My voice came out thin but clear enough. His expression changed only at the edges. "You were unconscious. I was trying to help." Celia looked from him to me. She used full names when she was alarmed. "Nora Bell. Michael Bell brought paperwork to this department while you could not respond. He attempted to submit donor consent authorization connected to blood procedures." The room seemed to narrow around her words. My fingers closed over the bracelet. "For Ashley?" Mike exhaled through his nose. "Ashley's condition is serious. This was practical. You have compatible blood records. I was trying to make sure nothing was delayed." "Practical," I repeated. I remembered his voice in the van. "Dead or alive, get her to the hospital." If you have ever woken up to discover somebody was making medical choices around your body, stay with me and subscribe. Some people call control help until you ask for the paperwork. Celia placed a thin folder on the counter but did not hand it to Mike. I flagged the irregularity before anything was approved. There was no valid consent from Nora Bell. The form is preserved. Mike's jaw tightened. You're making this sound criminal. I'm making it sound documented, Celia said. A man in a dark work jacket appeared at the curtain then, carrying my broken charger cable and a small tool roll. Ellis Ward had come because Celia had called the emergency contact listed in the print shop file. Ellis was my business partner, a cabinet maker who had built the counters when I first opened Bell Street Print Shop. He did not ask whether I was all right. He looked at the frayed cable, sat in the visitor's chair, and quietly opened the damaged connector with a tiny screwdriver. Mike watched him. Who is this? Ellis Ward, Celia said. Nora Bell's emergency contact. Ellis glanced up once. Your charger got crushed, he told me. I can save it. That was all. My throat tightened anyway. Mike had filled the room with explanations. Ellis had brought a tool. Celia gently unfastened the bracelet from my wrist while I watched. This needs to go into secured property while the incident review is open. I held it for 1 second before placing it in her palm. She carried it to the nurse's station, opened a locked property drawer, and set it inside. Mike moved into the corridor after Celia told him visiting time was over. Ellis stayed beside my bed, fitting the repaired cable into my phone until the screen lit weakly. I looked at Celia when she returned from the station. I'm not accusing Mike of anything yet, I said. I want the ambulance report. For 3 days, I stayed quiet in the hospital ward, answered questions, and read the ambulance report until the paper went soft at the folds. Thursday afternoon, Ellis drove me to Hartford Ambulance Station because the report listed Tessa Morgan's name and the station address beneath the crash entry. My bruises had turned yellow at the edges. Each bump in the road pulled at my ribs. Ellis kept both hands on the wheel and said nothing until we reached the brick station, where an ambulance sat under a bay light with rainwater drying in pale streaks along its side. Tessa Morgan met us after the dispatcher called back to the office. She was 31, still in paramedic uniform, with tired eyes and a clipboard pressed against her hip. Nora Bell, she asked. I remember you. I remember part of your voice, I said. Not much else. Tessa led us into a small office that smelled of printer toner and disinfectant. Ellis sat beside me, his knees angled toward the door, as if he could block it without making a show of it. Tessa opened her incident notes. My ambulance reached Old Mill Road at 9:23. I documented that to the minute. And before that, I asked? She looked at me for a long moment. Before we got there, a man was standing beyond the road barrier. He said he was your husband. My palms went damp. Mike Bell? He identified himself as Mike Bell. Tessa tapped the page. He was already there 4 minutes before our ambulance reached you. He wasn't calling for help when I saw him. He was watching the van. Ellis's face did not change, but his hand flattened over the edge of his chair. Can you testify to that? Yes, Tessa said. I wrote it down because it bothered me. Most people who come upon a crash are waving, shouting, trying to get someone's attention. Mike Bell was standing still. I had heard his voice at 9:19 through the damaged car system. Dead or alive, get her to the hospital. Ashley's illness can't wait. Now Tessa was telling me he had been waiting beside the barrier before the ambulance arrived. My skin went cold beneath my coat. I'll tell you what happened next, but first, write in the comments what you think this ends with. At that point, I had one witness, one terrible sentence, and far too many questions. Tessa pulled a dispatch time printout from her folder and held it out to me. Keep a copy. I kept the original note, too. I took the paper. In the middle of the page, 0923 had been circled in blue ink. Ellis leaned close enough to read it, then looked at Tessa. Thank you. Tessa returned to her office, closing the door carefully behind her. Ellis and I walked back into the ambulance station lobby with the printout between us, crisp and thin in my shaking hand. Zaminit. The day after Tessa handed me the dispatch printout, 2 days after Tessa handed me the dispatch printout, I sat at the print shop desk with the service sticker from my van laid beside the cash drawer, reading the address until Ellis said we should go. Saturday morning smelled of wet leaves and cold asphalt. Hayes Auto Inspection sat behind a chain-link fence, its faded blue sign rattling above 3 service bays. Ellis parked near the office door and came around to steady me when I got out. My ribs still complained when I bent, and I hated that he noticed before I could hide it. "I serviced your van last month," Omar Hayes said after I gave him my name. He was broad-shouldered, 50-something, in a gray work shirt darkened at the cuffs. "Your insurer called after the crash. Before I gave them anything, I pulled the exterior footage. My cameras overwrite after a while." He led us through the office, past a counter stacked with inspection forms, and into a bay where my van sat under white lights. The stone wall impact had folded the front end inward. Seeing it made my throat close. Omar crouched beside the driver's side and pointed beneath the chassis. "That's the brake hose," he said. "A hose can wear down. It can crack. Road salt can eat at it over years. But this isn't wear." He held up a flashlight. The rubber had been sliced in one clean, pale line. This was cut with a blade. Clean cut. Deliberate pressure. Then, when you pressed the brake pedal, the fluid went out and you lost braking power. Ellis lowered himself beside Omar without touching anything. His jaw tightened once. "Could it have happened in the crash?" he asked. Omar shook his head. "No, the crash damaged metal. This cut came first." My palms were sweating inside my coat sleeves. "Can you show me the footage?" I asked. Omar looked from me to Ellis, then nodded. "I can show you what I saved, but I need to be clear. If somebody did this, he may try to say my garage caused it." His voice stayed even, practical, built from cause and effect. That is why I saved everything before the insurer requested it. Back in the office, he opened a video file on an old monitor. The image was grainy, but clear enough. The rear lot, the corner of my van, rain-dark pavement. Then Mike walked through the gate. I watched him cross the screen twice before I could breathe again. He wore the dark coat he had worn that morning, the one with the torn lining at one cuff. He moved straight to my van. No searching, no hesitation. At 7:35, he bent beside the driver's side and stayed there long enough for my stomach to turn over. "That's Mike Bell," I said. I did not say husband. I did not say the man who had made coffee in our kitchen an hour earlier. Omar paused the frame. "You know him?" "Yes," I said. "He took my keys at 7:10. He said he was filling the tank." Ellis did not speak until Omar started the footage copying onto a small drive. Then he took out his phone and photographed the cut hose from several angles, including Omar's gloved hand holding the flashlight beside it for scale. "Get the lot entrance, too," Omar told him, "and the van's plate." Ellis did. The clicking sound was small in the garage, almost polite. Omar watched the progress bar crawl across his monitor. Outside, a delivery truck hissed through a puddle. I stared at Mike's frozen image on the screen and understood that the crash had not begun on Old Mill Road. It had begun in this rear lot, with a blade and enough time for him to walk away. When the copy finished, Omar slid the drive across the desk, but kept one hand on it for a second. "I'm keeping the original," he said. "If this goes where I think it goes, nobody gets to say the file disappeared." I put my hand over mine to stop the shaking. Ellis took one more photograph of the hose, then looked at the office window as if he had heard something outside. The rear lot gate gave a hard metallic clatter in the wind, and all three of us turned toward it. 3 days later, I spent Tuesday afternoon at Harbor Federal Credit Union, holding my monthly account alert in one hand while Ellis sat beside me in a windowless compliance room. The alert had named Renee Dalton as the contact for a paused medical account withdrawal. Renee came in carrying a thin file and a laptop. She was 48, neat-haired, careful-eyed, and she closed the door before she sat down. "Mrs. Bell," she said, "before I show you this, I need your answer on the record. "Did you authorize a transfer from your inherited savings?" "No," I said. The word came out clean. Renee opened the file. The transfer was for $38,400. It was labeled medical support. She turned the page toward me and read the signature aloud, letter by letter, the way someone might read a prescription warning. It looked like my name, but the loops were wrong. My real signature rises at the end of Bell. This one dropped. "This is not mine," I said. Ellis leaned forward, but he did not touch the paper. Renee clicked through the account records. The receiving account was not Ashley Bell's hospital account. It was a separate account Mike Bell controlled. He paid Ashley's actual hospital copay from it, $6,800. Then he attempted another withdrawal. That triggered review. Her finger stopped beside the remaining balance. $31,600 is frozen. My accessible savings had fallen to $33,600, and I had told myself the missing money must have been something Mike could explain. Now the room felt too warm, the fluorescent light too close. "What did he need from me?" I asked. Renee's face tightened, not with pity, but with restraint. Authorization, a valid signature, or someone who could not challenge the paperwork quickly. Ellis's hand rested flat on his knee. "We should call Mike," he said quietly. "Put him on speaker. Let him talk." I looked at the forged signature again. Mike had used Ashley's illness like a lockpick. He had made her suffering sound urgent enough that I would feel cruel for checking the numbers. Would you stay silent to gather more proof, or say it aloud before the person who lied could prepare? Write which choice you would make. What happened next depended on whether I let Mike keep believing I was still afraid of a confrontation. "No call," I said. Ellis turned toward me. "Nora, no." My voice was clipped now. "He knows I am asking questions. I want every signature record, every login, every transfer instruction, every note attached to this account." Renee nodded once, as if that was the answer she had been waiting for. "I can preserve the records and give you the documents we are permitted to release." She gathered the pages into a new folder, then stopped with her hand on the cover. "I also need your written statement that you deny authorizing the transfer." "I'll sign that," I said. My hand shook when Renee pushed the form toward me, but my name rose at the end exactly as it always had. Ellis watched me set the pen down. Renee placed the forged signature and my real one side by side, and the difference between them sat on the table like a door opening into a room I had not wanted to enter. 3 days later, on Friday night, I went back to the townhouse alone after finding Ashley's clinic visit written on Mike's kitchen calendar and asking her to come home afterward. The front walk shone black with rain. I stood beneath the porch light with an envelope inside my coat. Copies of the forged donor consent form Celia had preserved, the transfer record Renee had released, and the image of Mike beside my van. I had not told Ellis where I was going until I had already left the print shop. That was my choice, and it made my mouth dry. Mike opened the door before I knocked twice. He wore a blue sweater and held a glass of water. For 1 second, he looked relieved. Then he saw the envelope. "You should be resting," he said. "You should be answering questions," I said. He stepped aside and I entered the hallway where our framed wedding photograph still hung crooked from the crash day rush. The townhouse smelled of detergent, old wood, and the tomato soup Mike always made when he wanted to seem domestic. My stomach turned at the familiar smell. "Ashley is coming," I said. Mike shut the door behind me. "You brought her into this?" His voice stayed low. "She is already sick, Nora. She does not need your anger added to her treatment." I faced him in the kitchen. The same counter where he had returned my keys at 8:05 stood between us. "At 7:35, you went into Hayes Auto's rear lot," I said. "Omar Hayes has footage. He found the brake hose. It was cut." Mike set his glass down. He did not deny it. That was worse than denial. "You think you have witnesses now?" he said. "A paramedic, a mechanic, your friend from the shop. You think that makes you strong?" I felt the cold run from my shoulders to my fingertips. "Did you cut my brakes?" Mike looked at the kitchen clock but did not answer the question at first. Then he looked directly at me. "Ashley needed treatment. You had money you were sitting on. You kept saying we needed to talk, to plan, to decide. She did not have time for your process." "My process was consent," I said. "My money, my body." Mike's expression barely changed. "Cruelty is practical sometimes. You call it sabotage because you were the one in the van. I call it fair. You would have been hospitalized. You would have signed. Ashley would have had what she needed." He said it quietly, as if he were explaining an expense report. The refrigerator motor clicked on behind him. I could hear rain ticking against the kitchen window. Every hair on my arms lifted. "You said dead or alive," I told him. "I heard you." Mike's eyes moved to the envelope. "Then you know why I made sure you got to the hospital." My knees went weak, but I kept both hands on the counter. "You called my phone at 9:19. You were already waiting beyond the barrier before the ambulance arrived at 9:23. His face hardened at the exact numbers. "Tessa Morgan wrote it down," I said. "Omar saved the footage. Renee Dalton froze the account you used." For the first time, Mike's grip tightened around the edge of the counter. The front door opened before he could answer. Ashley Bell came in slowly, carrying a canvas tote against her side. She was smaller than I remembered from family dinners, pale under the hallway light, with damp brown hair tucked behind her ears. "I'm sorry," she said before either of us spoke. "Traffic was slow. Nora, you said it was important." Mike moved toward her. "You should not be here for this." Ashley looked at him, then at me. "You said Nora was helping. You said she agreed." Her voice was soft, but it did not disappear. I pulled the consent copy from the envelope. "Ashley, this was submitted while I was unconscious in the emergency ward." She took it with both hands. Her eyes traveled over the page, then stopped at my name. "Nora," she said, "I thought you were going to sign when you woke up." Her fingers tightened around the paper. "Mike said you needed to be in the hospital first. He said you were overwhelmed, and you would understand when you saw how serious it was." Mike exhaled through his nose. "Ashley, don't let her make you feel guilty for needing care." Ashley looked up at him. "Did you know she would crash?" The question sat in the kitchen without moving. Mike's mouth opened, then closed. I watched Ashley's face as she waited. She had known he wanted me hospitalized. She had believed that meant pressure, maybe persuasion, maybe a terrible family argument. The knowledge that he had planned more than that arrived in her eyes one piece at a time. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I knew he said you had to be there. I did not know he meant this." Mike reached for the consent copy. Ashley stepped back. "Give me that," he said. His voice sharpened, finally losing its smooth edge. "It is hospital paperwork. You don't understand it." "Neither did Nora, apparently," Ashley said. The words seemed to cost her. Her lower lip trembled, and she pressed it hard between her teeth. I wanted to take the page from her, to make this easier, but she held it closer to her chest. Mike turned toward me instead. "You came here to poison her against me." "I came here because you used her illness to justify what you did," I said. "You paid her copay, $6,800. The rest of my money stayed in an account you controlled." Ashley flinched as though I had raised my voice. Mike stared at the countertop, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "You found the financial angle, too. Congratulations." He looked at Ashley again. "I was trying to keep you alive." "By taking her choices?" Ashley asked. "By making her crash?" His phone began ringing in the study. Mike glanced toward the hall. The sound cut through the kitchen again and again. He rubbed his forehead once, then pointed at the envelope. "This conversation is not over." "No," I said, "it is not." He walked out of the kitchen, leaving the phone to ring until he reached the study. A moment later, the door shut, muffling his voice. Ashley and I stood beneath the harsh ceiling light. She looked down at the consent copy, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her tote. "I'm keeping this," she said. I nodded. My ribs hurt with every breath. "Keep it somewhere he cannot reach." Ashley did not answer. She sat at the kitchen table with the tote on her lap, staring at the closed study door. I picked up my envelope, walked through the hallway, and let myself out. On the front walk, rain cooled my face. Behind me, Mike's voice rose faintly through the townhouse walls, too blurred to make out. Through the kitchen window, Ashley remained at the table, one hand over her tote, while the study door stayed closed. For 3 days, I stayed between my apartment over Bell Street print shop and St. Anne's, reading statements until the words blurred and my injured ribs began to ache again. On Monday afternoon, Clara Webb's emergency ethics hearing filled a small room with glass walls, microphones, and the blue hospital seal behind her chair. Celia's written report had brought us there. A hospital staff member showed Ellis, Tessa, Omar, Renee, and me where to sit. Mike arrived with a lawyer and chose the seat opposite mine. The hearing was live-streamed to the hospital review system. A red light glowed beside the camera. Mike noticed it too. Clara Webb was 56, silver-haired, and calm in the way some people become calm when they have decided not to let anyone move the facts. "I will ask for the source, then the time," she said. "Mr. Bell, this review concerns a consent document submitted while Nora Bell was unconscious and whether pressure was used to obtain that consent." Mike called the question insulting. He said Ashley's illness was serious, that every decision had been practical, and that Nora had always supported treatment. I watched his fingers flatten against the table. "Practical," he said, "is not the same thing as cruel." Tessa sat forward when Clara asked what she had seen on Old Mill Road. "My ambulance reached Nora Bell at 9:23, she said. Mike Bell was already standing beyond the road barrier. He was there before we arrived. Clara asked for the source and time again, and Tessa repeated them without changing her voice. Omar followed, describing the clean cut in the brake hose and the saved exterior footage from Hayes Auto. He did not dress it up. "A hose does not separate like that through ordinary use," he said. "A blade causes a clean cut. Cause, then effect." Renee opened a folder and read Mike's signature aloud from the forged transfer request. The amount was $38,400, routed into an account called a medical account, but controlled by Mike, not Ashley's hospital. Renee explained that she had frozen the remaining $31,600 before the records could be cleared. Mike's lawyer objected twice. Clara asked for the source, then the dates in the file, and the objections went nowhere. Ellis said nothing. He only shifted his chair closer to mine when my hand began shaking beneath the table. Then the door opened. Ashley stood there in a dark coat, her tote pressed against her side. The hospital advocate had called her after Clara's office told her she could submit a statement, but I had not known whether she would come. Mike turned white in a way I had never seen before. "Ashley," he said, low and warning, "you are sick. You do not need this." She walked past him without looking at me, then placed a stack of printed text messages beside Omar's still image from the garage camera. Clara asked her to identify the documents. Ashley swallowed. "They are Mike's messages to me." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "He said Nora would be overwhelmed after the crash. He said the hospital would make her understand." Mike rose halfway from his chair. His lawyer touched his sleeve, but Mike pulled free. Ashley looked directly at the camera, then at Clara. Her face had gone pale, but she did not fold. "He told me the crash would get Nora where he could make her sign." The room seemed to lose its air. My throat closed so hard I could barely breathe. Mike said Ashley was confused. Tessa's expression did not change, but I saw her glance at the hearing clock, then at Mike, as if the words had locked into the timing she had carried since 9:23. Ellis put his palm flat on the table beside mine, not over my hand, beside it. Clara asked Ashley whether Mike had said the crash was accidental. Ashley answered that he had never called it an accident. She said he had called it necessary, then practical. Mike lunged toward the printouts. Hospital security entered through the side door before he reached them. He shouted my name, then Ashley's, but the guards took his arms and walked him out toward the security office. Ashley kept one hand on the papers until the door shut behind him. Omar's footage played silently on the monitor beside her messages, and the red live stream light remained on. The next evening, Bell Street print shop smelled of warm paper, ink, and the dust Ellis had stirred from the old front sign. I had reopened for only a few hours, long enough to print a memorial program and a stack of restaurant menus, when Renee called from the credit union. She said the frozen $31,600 had returned to my accessible savings. The remaining $6,800 was secured by a lien against Mike, tied to the hospital copay he had made in Ashley's name. The records are preserved, Renee said. Nobody can quietly make this disappear now. I stood behind the counter with the phone against my ear until the call ended. My palms were damp. The money did not repair the sound of brakes failing, or the kitchen, where Mike had called sabotage, fair. It did not restore a marriage. But it was mine again, recorded under my name, not hidden beneath a lie. Ellis came in from the front window carrying a screwdriver and saw my face. "Good news?" he asked. I told him exactly what Renee had said. He nodded once. "Then we keep the shop." Ashley arrived after the hospital social worker gave her the shop address from the contact information on the hearing notice. She held a folder against her coat and looked thinner than she had 4 days earlier. "I'm sorry," she said before anything else. "The hospital aid office approved independent assistance. They said my care can continue without Mike handling money or consent forms." Her eyes filled and she blinked hard. "I thought I needed him to make everything happen." "You needed treatment," I said. "That was never the same thing." Ashley let out a breath that trembled. Ellis brought 3 paper cups of coffee from the back room and did not ask questions he had no right to ask. Ashley told us she would stay with a friend while the hospital advocate helped her make a longer plan. I believed her because she had brought her own paperwork, her own folder, and had come through my door alone. When she left, she hugged me carefully, avoiding my ribs. After the bell above the door stopped ringing, Ellis set a ladder beneath the sign that still read Bell and Bell. My stomach tightened at the brass letters. Mike had never built a counter, printed an order, or opened the shop in a snowstorm. Still, his name had hung there for years. Ellis held the ladder steady while I climbed, loosened the screws, and removed Mike's name 1 letter at a time. About 3 months later, I spent Sunday morning opening the shop windows and letting March air push out the stale winter smell. Ellis stood outside with a new brass-free sign wrapped in brown paper. It read Bell Street Print Shop in clean black lettering. Nothing added, nothing borrowed. "Straight enough?" he asked as he raised it into place. "Half an inch left," I said. Celia met me at the hospital entrance before I came to the shop. She unlocked the property drawer, lifted my silver emergency medical bracelet into her palm, and handed it to me across the counter. "You pressed it," she said. "That matters." I fastened it around my wrist while she watched, then thanked her and left before my voice could break. Now, sunlight caught the silver at my wrist as I pushed the last window open. Ellis looked up from the ladder and saw it flash. "You keeping it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. I chose to wake up. He tightened the final screw, stepped down, and we stood on the sidewalk beneath the new sign. Cars passed. Somewhere nearby, a delivery truck rattled over a pothole. My chest still tightened at sudden metal sounds, but I stayed where I was. When someone tries to turn your silence into permission, do you stay quiet or speak before they write your life for you? Subscribe for more stories like this.